back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing a legal challenge to the Ford government's decision to take out bike lanes on three Toronto streets. A group of cycling activists have argued that this is a violation of their charter right to security of person. Now, Stefan, some critics of this claim have argued that this lawsuit is essentially a claim for what are called positive rights. Maybe can you explain what positive rights are and if you think this is an example of it or if it's a classic Section 7 claim?
So there's a distinction that can be drawn between negative and positive rights. So a negative right would be a right to non-interference. If you have a right to a house or an apartment, could even be your lease. Um, it's usually a negative right. That means people can't just come in without your permission. Same thing with your right to bodily integrity. If somebody assaults you, they're infringing a negative right to non-interference. Positive rights are rights that correlate to duties on other people to do something actively for your benefit. So the claim here is fundamentally one that involves a claim to actively have the government install and maintain, once they're installed, bike lanes. Um, and in this sense, it would be a positive rights claim. Now, just to be clear, positive rights, there's no problem. There's no inherent issue with positive rights. We have all sorts of positive rights given to us by legislation. The issue is that the government has finite resources, and as such, the question we should be asking is whether it's appropriate to have judges weighing in on the priorities that the government is going to choose to advance, or whether those priorities are best determined by the legislative branches and the government.
Albert, what's your take on this? Do you view this as a positive rights claim, which perhaps it's not a problem if it is a positive rights claim, but others have characterized this as once the government has undertaken the obligation to have roads and have cyclists on roads, they can't have the roads operate in a way that would violate the charter rights. So what's your take on if this is positive or a classic charter claim?
Yeah, Cycle Toronto in its application, I mean, it was quite clear that they're not asserting that this is a positive right. In other words, they're not saying that we have a right as, residents to bike lanes to keep us safe. What they're saying is these bike lanes were in place. We know that they keep cyclists safe. In fact, the evidence says if you remove those bike lanes, the number of collisions will go up dramatically and the peril to cyclists will be increased. So they've made quite clear that they're not asserting a positive rights. That's yet to be determined by the court. However, what they are saying is that the bike lanes were in place. Removing them now does imperil their safety. There's increased risk of injury and death. And that's really the crux of the matter that the judge will have to decide.
Stefan, how does a court determine if something is a positive claim or not? Because that seems to be part of the big issue here. And I know that courts have opined on the existence of positive charter rights in the past. There's a famous case called Gosselin and Quebec, where the court said the charter has not been used to create positive rights at this point. So how do they decide if the argument is a positive rights claim or a negative rights claim? Because I think that might be really the core of how this might get decided.
So just to be clear here, yes, Scotland theoretically says no, but the courts have kind of taken this logic of once the government assumes a positive duty voluntarily, you can't then, take it away afterwards as a kind of workaround. We saw this in an Ontario Court of Appeal decision last year relating to climate change.
The Mather
So
decision, yeah.
yes, right. So what I would suggest is that when you're talking about a bike lanes dispute, the government not only has installed bike lanes, but there's an ongoing obligation to maintain them. If you're taking the position that they can't be removed, implicitly you're saying that those bike lanes have to be maintained, which implies positive duties, ongoing positive duties on the part of the government. Maybe you're okay with this, but we should ask ourselves whether the government's entitled to change its priorities once it has chosen to install bike lanes. Perhaps those bike lanes will no longer be in the public interest. Perhaps the government has different priorities. Perhaps the electorate has conveyed to the government that it should have different priorities. So the logic at play here is one where once the government says we have bike lanes and we install them, it would be forever bound to keep those bike lanes in place and to maintain them. And I would suggest that that is the core of a positive obligation.
Albert, is there anything you want to say in response in the last 20 seconds?
Well, simply that the evidence is clear that these removing bike lanes will make it more dangerous. Will make the roads more dangerous for cyclists.
Mhm.
Will expose them to greater risk of being hit by cars, and
Sure.
that collisions will go up significantly.
We've got to go to break.